Part 25. The Best Physiognomist. Author, Yanyun Yuchi. Chapter 241. In front of Baiko Pavilion. Ye Xianyun's expectant questioning quickly made Zhang Fengjai wake up from his deep thought state. Well. After retracting his attention to the feng shui of the pharmacy, he couldn't help but sigh, and then said with a solemn expression. It's a pity that a treasure land of feng shui, where wealth can be gathered and pulses can be gathered, has been cut off. My little friend, does it mean the private Tianren hospital? After hearing Zhang Fengjai's 16-character feng shui assertion, Mr. Hu asked with a gleam in his eyes. Since ancient times, there has been a saying in China, a scholar studying medicine catches a chicken in a cage. Scholars in ancient times often turned to medicine if they were not successful in examinations, and it was easy to get started. Because Chinese medicine is inextricably linked to Confucianism, Taoism, the I Ching, Bagua, Yin Yang, and 5 elements, as well as martial arts, tea ceremony, chess, calligraphy, and painting, Mr. Hu, who is proficient in Chinese medicine, can immediately guess the meaning of his feng shui assertion. Zhang Maple Leaf nodded without any surprise. That's right. Then, he pointed at the 4 directions of the pharmacy, the southeast, northwest, and explained. To the west of the pharmacy is a tributary of the canal, which occupies the water in the 5 elements feng shui. To the north of the pharmacy is the forest park, which occupies the wood element in the 5 elements of feng shui. To the east of the pharmacy is the north bus terminal. The busy traffic uses oil. Oil is a burning thing and occupies the fire element in the 5 elements of feng shui. To the south of the drugstore, where we are now, is a vertical road where people flow. It can bring wealth and gold and silver customers, and it occupies the gold in the 5 elements of feng shui. Having said this, Zhang Fengjai mobilized his physical strength of steel and iron bones to directly smash the hard concrete pavement under his feet, then reached out and grabbed a handful of soil mixed with red, and continued to explain. Red soil is an emperor-like precious existence in the soil. It has the powerful effect of gathering luck and spiritual energy. It occupies the soil in the 5 elements feng shui. The 5 elements of feng shui are complete, and the emperor gathers luck. If it weren't for the fact that it's located in a bustling city, the location of the pharmacy would have the potential to transform the dragon's veins. Shishi. Dragon vein, still used by emperors in ancient times, is an excellent feng shui treasure. This made Mr. Hu, who knew a little about yin yang, 5 elements, and feng shui layout, and was proficient in classics, couldn't help but take a breath of cold air. Mr. Hu's shocking behavior immediately aroused Ye Xianyun's interest. She immediately pestered Mr. Hu to ask about the origin of the dragon vein and the benefits of possessing the dragon vein. As the saying goes, eaters are soft-mouthed, and predators are short-handed. Faced with the boss who hired him with a high salary, Mr. Hu could only explain in detail truthfully. Zhang Fengjai took this opportunity to observe Tianren Hospital, which was located across an alley. Compared with the 2-story building of Baiko Pavilion, Tianren Hospital, which specializes in Western medicine, is completely huge. It not only has a 13-story main building, but also has 4 auxiliary buildings with 6 to 8 floors next to it. In the eyes of ordinary people, the 5 high-rise buildings owned by Tianren Hospital are just to prove that they are a powerful private hospital, but under Zhang Fengjai's eyes, it is not the case at all. The main building is in the front and the auxiliary building is on the side. If you look closely, it looks like a steel knife with its peak facing outward. The main building is facing Baiko Pavilion. The 2 auxiliary buildings on the north side extend directly to the forest park. The 2 auxiliary buildings on the south side forcibly change the longitudinal extension of the road, ultimately forming a dominant terrain that dominates the mountain. Due to the unique nature of hospital operations, although Tianren Hospital will not affect the wealth and luck of other surrounding merchants, it will be a fatal blow to Baiko Pavilion, which is also engaged in life-saving and healing the wounded. Because of the dominating terrain of the 4 auxiliary buildings, the main building, which is like a steel knife, will not only make all patients who come to seek medical treatment instantly develop feelings of disgust and distrust, but will also harm Ye Xianyun's own financial fortune. At this time, he could probably guess why Ye Xianyun wanted to quit the Roman holiday mansion, which was probably directly related to the dilemma faced by Baiko Pavilion. Just when he had just withdrawn his attention from Tianren Hospital, Ye Xianyun also happened to listen to Mr. Hu's detailed introduction to Dragon Vein Feng Shui, which made her suddenly ask doubts in her heart. Zhang Fengjai, since Baiko Pavilion occupies such an excellent Feng Shui location, why is the business so sluggish? Because of the existence of Tianren Hospital. Pointing to Tianren Hospital, where patients kept coming, Zhang Fengjai briefly introduced the dominance of Tianren Hospital and its fatal impact on Baiko Pavilion. Zhang Fengjai, what should I do? As long as Tianren Hospital occupies the dominant position, Baiko Pavilion will only be closed down. This makes Ye Xianyun feel very frustrated and extremely unwilling. Because Baiko Pavilion not only invested all her efforts, but also used most of Fengda Group's funds, which has affected the normal operation of the group. If Baiko Pavilion eventually closes down, the shareholders of Fengda Group will definitely kick her out of the group on the pretext of misappropriation of wages and poor management, thereby losing the trust and support left to her by her mother. If I want to solve the trouble at Tianren Hospital, I now have two ways. In fact, Zhang Fengjai had already thought of a solution for Ye Xianyun when he saw the dominance of Tianren Hospital and the sharpness of the steel blade. Say it, Ye Xianyun quickly put away her frustration and unwillingness, and gestured with a serious attitude. The first way is to help you choose a Feng Shui treasure land with complete 5 elements to avoid the influence of Tianren Hospital's dominance of the terrain. No. Ye Xianyun shook her head and rejected the first solution proposed by Zhang Fengjai without even thinking about it. Zhang Fengjai, in order to run the Baiko Pavilion brand into a century-old brand, I not only signed a 30-year lease contract with the landlord, but also spent more than 10 million yuan on the early decoration of the entire pharmacy, employee training, annual salaries for hiring Mr. Hu and others, and the purchase of a large number of medicinal materials. Now I can't move away, and I can't afford to move. Besides, I'm not willing to leave like this. In that case, then use the formation to forcibly change the pattern of the 5 elements of Feng Shui, so as to break the monopoly of Tianren Hospital. If Ye Xianyun agrees to the method of relocating the pharmacy to avoid a direct confrontation with Tianren Hospital, Zhang Fengjai will be very disappointed. Because if he wants to revive the reputation of traditional Chinese medicine and build a century-old brand, he needs not only superb medical skills, genuine medicinal materials, fair management, but also the courage to face challenges. Ye Xianyun's unwilling and helpless choice made him feel very satisfied, and he decided to do his best to help her solve the threat of Tianren Hospital. The Best Physiognomist. Author, Yanyun Yuqi. Chapter 242. In front of Baiko Pavilion. Zhang Fengjai, thank you. Hearing that Zhang Fengjai was willing to help solve the threat of Tianren Hospital, Ye Xianyun, who could not suppress her excitement, directly opened her arms and hugged him tightly. While erecting her breasts and squeezing her chest hard, Zhang Fengjai immediately thought of the tenderness he had with Sulitzi last night, and his body immediately reacted to his own body. Although the solar term has passed the beginning of autumn, the temperature in beginning of autumn is much hotter than in the summer, so he only wore a pair of thin casual pants, which easily showed the changes in his body. In order to avoid embarrassment in front of Ye Xianyun and Mr. Hu, he could only forcefully break away from the other party's hug, and quickly shifted his attention to resolving the Feng Shui pattern, thereby eliminating Long Yang's urge to raise his head. Mr. Ye, Tianren Hospital not only occupies a dominant Feng Shui terrain, but the special layout of the main building and auxiliary buildings will give the dominant terrain the power to attack. So, if you want to successfully crack the Feng Shui pattern of Tianren Hospital, you need to prepare some special instruments and items in advance. Ye Xianyun was so excited that she didn't notice Zhang Fenjai's physical reaction. Now there is only one thought in her mind, and that is to fully cooperate with Zhang Fenjai to solve the troubles encountered by Baiko Pavilion. Therefore, after hearing Zhang Fenjai's reminder, she quickly asked, "Zhang Fenjai, what kind of magical weapons and items do you need me to prepare?" 25 pure gold coins, 36 drops of morning dew, 72 short silver nails, and 108 round soybeans. There was a slight pause in his tone. Zhang Fenjai raised his head and glanced at Ye Xianyun, and whispered with a little embarrassment, 9 drops of Tiangi blood, 6 drops of sad tears, 3 drops of heart blood, and they all come from you. Ye Xianyun not only knew what was going on with the 4 things Zhang Fenjai said before he paused, but he was also able to prepare them in a short time. But the 3 things she said after the pause made her feel a bit confused, and she was completely confused as to what was going on. Faced with Ye Xianyun's questioning, Zhang Fenjai flashed an embarrassed wry smile, then quickly pointed at Mr. Hu and said, "Mr. Ye, Mr. Hu knows what Tiangi blood, sad tears, and heart blood are, just ask him directly." After raising the embarrassing topic to Mr. Hu, Zhang Fenjai walked directly across the street and returned to the drugstore. Mr. Hu, on the other hand, looked depressed and helpless, and with a slightly red face, he explained to Ye Xianyun in a low voice the situation of Tiangi blood, sad tears, and heart blood. After hearing Mr. Hu's explanation, Ye Xianyun's face turned red. The tears shed when sad and the blood bitten off the tongue are understandable and acceptable, but the need for Tiangi blood when a woman does bad things makes her feel very shy and embarrassed. Fortunately, Mr. Hu, who understood yin, yang, 5 elements, and feng shui, and was well versed in the ways of the world, resolved her inner embarrassment in time, and Ye Xianyun finally decided to contribute a few things Zhang Fenjai needed. Then, she helped Mr. Hu back to the pharmacy, and then said to Zhang Fenjai, "Zhang Fenjai, it will take about 10 days to get the 7 things you need. Okay, let's leave each other's phone numbers and call me directly after you get everything together. Whether it's more expensive coins or more labor-intensive collection of morning sun dew, as long as you're willing to pay, you can get it together in a day or 2 at most." Ye Xianyun postponed the time to 10 days later, probably because of her own reasons, so Zhang Fenjai nodded to express understanding. Then, he turned his attention to Mr. Hu and continued to deal with his visit. After hearing the 19 medicinal materials Zhang Fenjai needed, Mr. Hu's eyes flashed, and then he asked with a tone full of expectation, "My dear friend, I would like to ask you, I wonder what the medicinal materials you purchased are used for." The taboo among Chinese medicine colleagues, which is also the reason that restricts the development of Chinese medicine, is the confidentiality of prescriptions. Although Zhang Fenjai also wants to revitalize traditional Chinese medicine, the prescriptions he currently has come from his grandfather, and he is not qualified to handle or disclose them privately. Therefore, in the face of Mr. Hu's obscure inquiry, he could only cover it up vaguely. "Remove poison and strengthen your body." "I see." With a trace of disappointment flashing in his eyes, Mr. Hu nodded, then closed his eyes and recalled the stock of the drugstore and the whereabouts of several other rare medicinal materials. After all, the satisfactory attitude of the thin boy in front of him not only determines the life and death of the pharmacy, but also affects his own job. "Where's the doctor? Come and help." Just as Zhang Fenjai was waiting for Mr. Hu's reply, 3 people suddenly burst in at the door. A fierce-looking, tattooed middle-aged man wearing a vest. A pure-looking girl wearing a high school uniform, and a middle-aged woman with a dignified temperament, her eyes closed, and her face as pale as expected. "Sir, don't be anxious. Please explain your needs in detail first." The young man from the pharmacy immediately showed concern on his face and hurriedly greeted him. Perhaps it was because of the young man's caring look that the fierce-looking middle-aged man fell in love with him. He tried his best to suppress his anxious mood and explained, "Where is the doctor in your store?" My daughter-in-law has a sudden illness and is unconscious. Please save her quickly. After hearing the middle-aged man's explanation, the young man looked directly at Mr. Hu. My friend, I'm sorry, please wait a moment. Mr. Hu opened his eyes, confessed to Zhang Fengjai, and quickly walked to the middle-aged woman, and then looked at the reaction of the woman's pupils, the color of her tongue, and the frequency of breathing between her nose. Then, he put his fingers on the other person's wrist and carefully checked the cause and condition of the other person's coma. Ye Xianyuan, on the other hand, walked up to the middle-aged man and began to find out why he came to see a doctor in a roundabout way. After all, Baikou Pavilion is only separated by an alley from Tianren Hospital. Only the elderly who truly believe in the efficacy of traditional Chinese medicine and only suffer from chronic diseases are likely to take the initiative to see a doctor. Therefore, it is normal for Ye Xianyuan to suspect the middle-aged man's motives. You think I want to come here to see a doctor? Faced with Ye Xianyuan's inquiry, the hot-tempered middle-aged man first snarled in a rather unhappy tone, and then started to explain cursingly. The quack doctors and vampires at Tianren Hospital spent nearly 30,000 yuan on examination fees, and finally concluded that it was untreatable, and then kicked us out of the hospital. If my wife hadn't been unconscious and needed care, I would have killed these unscrupulous vampires right now. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Best Physiognomist. Author, Yanyun Yuqi. Chapter 243. In Baikou Pavilion. When he heard that the reason why the middle-aged man came to seek medical treatment actually involved Tianren Hospital, which was going to be dealt with 10 days later, Zhang Fengjai, who had not planned to intervene at first, immediately had a look of surprise in his eyes. Then, he immediately mobilized the spiritual power of his Danshan to open his eyes and carefully observed the situation inside the middle-aged woman's body. The internal organs are strong and powerful, the 3 souls and 7 souls are intact, and the meridians and blood vessels are running well. Zhang Fengjai couldn't help but frown when he saw that not only was there no abnormality in the middle-aged woman's body, but she was also healthier than ordinary people. At the same time, Mr. Hu finished checking the pulse and took back his fingers. Doctor, what's going on with my wife? When he saw Mr. Hu retracting his finger from his wife's wrist, the middle-aged man immediately asked nervously. The meridians are expanded and strong, the breathing is steady and orderly, and the internal organs are the same. It doesn't seem to be a sign of illness. Ignoring the middle-aged man's questioning, Mr. Hu frowned and muttered to himself. Not sick. Mr. Hu talked to himself about the diagnosis of the disease without deliberately lowering his voice. This made the middle-aged man, who clearly heard the diagnosis results, immediately become noisy. Old guy, if my wife was not sick, how could she have been unconscious all this time? I think you are just like the guys at Tianren Hospital, you are also a quack doctor who knows nothing. Shut up. Upon hearing the middle-aged man's insult to Mr. Hu, Ye Xianyuan immediately shouted with a frosty face. Mr. Hu's name is Hu Zhenchuo, and he is nicknamed the Soul-Destroying Hand. With his medical hands, he can revive the souls of the dead. Although it is an exaggeration, it is enough to illustrate Mr. Hu's superb medical skills. Moreover, in order to invite Mr. Hu to sit in the Baikou Pavilion in person, she directly offered 1,000,000 yuan. How could she tolerate other people's slander against him? Ye Xianyuan shouted harshly, which immediately aroused the middle-aged man's anger. Then he picked up a chair next to him and threw it directly at the counter next to Zhang Fengjai. But when the middle-aged man was less than 1 meter away from the counter, Zhang Fengjai quickly raised his foot and kicked him nearly 6 meters away from the store. However, Zhang Fengjai's attack just now not only controlled the strength, but also used certain skills. Therefore, the kick just now seemed very harsh, but in fact the middle-aged man did not suffer any damage, which made him immediately roll around and cry. Come and see. Baiko Pavilion is beating someone. Since the entrance of Baiko Pavilion is facing a busy street, there is a constant flow of pedestrians on the road. Therefore, after hearing the middle-aged man's howl, countless pedestrians gathered around him. Among them, there are many elderly people and women who like to gossip. Dear uncles and aunts, brothers and sisters, today I took my wife to this Baiko Pavilion for medical treatment. Not only did they. Zhang Fenjai's risky move just now gave the other party an excuse to frame him, but his move was also to protect Baiko Pavilion's property. After all, there are many wild, precious and rare medicinal materials stored in the counter, which are also the insecticides that Baiko Pavilion used to build its reputation. Therefore, in order to prevent the middle-aged man from continuing to slander Baiko Pavilion, and not to let the other party throw dirty water on Zhang Fenjai, Ye Xianyun was ready to admit defeat and take the money for personal gain. However, just when she was about to interrupt the middle-aged man's slander, Zhang Fenjai took the lead and asked, "Uncle, why did I kick you just now?" "Because you want to kill people and silence them." The middle-aged man, who was not afraid of things getting serious, immediately started talking nonsense. "Why do we want to kill people and silence them?" Zhang Fenjai asked with a lifeless smile as he stood up and walked towards the middle-aged woman. "Because you are all a bunch of quackery doctors who don't like my wife's illness. You are afraid that I will speak nonsense and affect Baiko Pavilion, so you want to kill her and silence her. Who said we can't take good care of your wife's illness?" Zhang Fenjai stopped next to the middle-aged woman and asked with a smile. "That old man." The middle-aged man immediately pointed at Mr. Hu, who looked ugly, and said, "Uncle, Chinese medicine pays attention to looking, asking, and cutting when treating a disease. Dr. Hu just made a preliminary diagnosis of the condition by taking the pulse, and hasn't really started treatment yet. How do you know that we can't cure your wife's disease?" After Zhang Fenjai refuted the middle-aged man's slander with a smile, he turned around and supported Mr. Hu's arm. He squeezed it tightly and asked with a smile, "Dr. Hu, a minor problem like acupuncture damage is not worthy of your personal attention at all. Why don't you leave it to me, your apprentice?" Small. Although the young Zhang Fenjai showed superb attainments in yin-yang, 5 elements, and feng shui layout, which made Mr. Hu sincerely admire him, but the diagnosis of traditional Chinese medicine involves life-threatening matters, so it is not a joke to use it to praise one's anger. Therefore, Mr. Hu flatly refused without even thinking about it. But a sudden numbness in his arm prevented him from saying the words of rejection. Instead, Zhang Fenjai forcibly pressed him down on the chair. Afterwards, Zhang Fenjai turned around and walked to the middle-aged woman's side, put his fingers on her wrist, and then used the pulse-taking method to further check to confirm his suspicion. When the unique pulse-taking technique revealed slight damage to the Jianjing points on both sides of the middle-aged woman's back shoulders, Zhang Fenjai looked at the little girl who had been silent since entering the door with a confident smile and praised, "Little sister, although you are not very old, your finger techniques and skills in acupointment massage are excellent." After hearing Zhang Fenjai's praise, everyone at the scene felt puzzled, but the little girl couldn't help but take 2 steps back with a sudden change of expression, and a panicked look appeared in her eyes. This also made the shrewd Ye Xianyun quickly glance at the unconscious middle-aged woman, with a thoughtful look in her eyes. Although he didn't know why his daughter was afraid of the other party's praise, the middle-aged man who was eager to protect his daughter immediately stood up and rushed to the little girl, then glared at Zhang Fenjai and roared, "Boy, if you have any means, just come at me directly, don't scare my daughter." Facing the middle-aged man's angry glare, Zhang Fenjai explained sincerely, bent over to pick up the middle-aged woman, and then let her lie flat on the ground with her back facing up. "Uncle, I didn't mean to scare the little girl just now, I was sincerely praising her." Then, he opened the collar of the middle-aged woman, revealing her smooth and white shoulders, and pointed at the slightly reddish areas on both sides of her shoulders and explained, "Because your daughter can not only accurately find the Jianjing acupointment to relieve fatigue, but also use finger massage to ensure that the aunt's life is not harmed while keeping her in a coma for 3 to 5 months. I think even a truly top acupointment massage master would need at least 20 years to achieve this step. The Best Physiognomist. Author, Yanyun Yuchi. Chapter 244. In Baiko Pavilion. After hearing Zhang Fenjai's explanation to the middle-aged man and his praise for the little girl, Hu Lao, with a flash of understanding in his eyes, immediately rushed to the middle-aged woman. While bending down to carefully observe the slightly reddened parts of the shoulders, he also used the pulse-taking technique to re-examine, and finally couldn't help but nod and praise. 3-point damage to 2 acupuncture points, and sleepiness that does not harm life. Even with my understanding of acupuncture points, it is difficult to achieve such a perfect degree. Then, Hu Lao turned his head to look at the little girl hiding behind the middle-aged man, and after a flash of expectation in his eyes, he turned his head and asked Zhang Fenjai, "My friend, are you sure that the damage to the other party's 2 shoulder well acupuncture points was done by this little girl herself? Dr. Hu, whether it is her doing or not, just let this aunt wake up and ask." Zhang Fenjai pointed at the middle-aged woman and smiled to remind her, but couldn't help frowning and falling into deep thought. Because of Mr. Hu's precise analysis of the degree of damage to the acupuncture points and his modesty about his acupuncture and acupuncture points, he suddenly realized that the means of acupuncture point damage had completely deviated from the level of massage and medical skills, and obviously belonged to the scope of internal martial arts and Taoism. So, who taught the little girl the acupuncture point massage technique, and why didn't he directly teach her the internal skills or Taoism skills? After all, being able to master the acupuncture point massage technique at such a young age and making sure that the acupuncture point damage is not life-threatening is enough to prove the other party's talent in martial arts and Taoism. The acupuncture points are in the meridians, and the meridians connect the internal organs and blood vessels. Ignoring Zhang Fenjai, who was in deep thought, Mr. Hu immediately began to think about how to wake up the middle-aged woman. The damage to the acupuncture points indicates the damage to the internal organs and blood vessels. Then, only by replenishing the qi and blood can the acupuncture points be restored to their original state, and then the patient can wake up from the coma. After mumbling to himself and figuring out the solution, Mr. Hu immediately looked up and instructed the female doctor who was responsible for dispensing medicine behind the counter. Xioxia, 9 grams of angelica, 13 grams of tangerine peel, 1 tail of wolfberry, 2 slices of ginseng. After naming 11 kinds of medicinal materials for replenishing qi and blood, Mr. Hu continued to instruct. Soak all the medicinal materials in clear water for 30 minutes, boil them with strong fire until boiling, then change to slow fire and boil for 40 minutes, wait until it cools down, and continue to add water and boil twice. Yes, Mr. Hu. After nodding in response, the female doctor immediately began to dispense medicine, and the middle-aged man asked anxiously, "Dr. Hu, when will my wife be able to wake up?" According to the damage to the Jianjing acupointment, combined with the speed of Chinese medicine to replenish qi and blood, it will take about 2 days. After giving an uncertain answer, Mr. Hu couldn't help but pat Zhang Fenjai, who was in deep thought, asking himself whether the treatment method just now was reasonable and whether the time of awakening was accurate. After hearing the treatment method given by Mr. Hu, Zhang Fenjai shook his head and didn't say much, but directly took out 5 silver needles from his sleeves, and then pierced the middle-aged woman's Fengmen, Tianzu, Faishu, Xinshu, and Tianzhong acupoints at a dazzling speed. This is the Suangi 13 needles that have been lost for hundreds of years. When seeing the dazzling acupuncture method, Mr. Hu suddenly stood up and shouted excitedly. Han ignored Mr. Hu's loss of composure, and Zhang Fenjai slowly pulled out the silver needle that had just pierced the acupointment. When the last needle that had pierced the Tianzhong acupuncture point was pulled out, the middle-aged woman in coma suddenly yawned, then slowly opened her eyes and praised with satisfaction. "Zai, when did you learn the massage technique?" It's so powerful and comfortable. Seeing his wife, who had been in a coma for nearly a day and a night, finally wake up, the middle-aged man immediately showed a look of surprise on his face. The elderly and women who were watching outside the Baiko pavilion began to whisper about Chinese medicine and praised Zhang Fengjai and Hu Zhenchuo's superb medical skills. This also made Ye Xianyun feel very surprised, and her eyes looking at Zhang Fengjai showed a different feeling. The middle-aged man's inner surprise did not last long. After hearing his wife's praise for his daughter, his face suddenly changed and turned to look at his daughter, and asked sternly, "Zia, why did you hurt your mother?" Facing her father's angry questioning, the little girl's face was as pale as paper, and 2 lines of tears immediately flowed from the corners of her eyes. "Husband, what are you doing? Why are you criticizing Zia?" When the middle-aged woman heard the middle-aged man's questioning voice, she quickly stood up to persuade him, but unexpectedly found herself in a completely unfamiliar environment, and there were many strangers standing around, and she immediately asked in confusion, "Husband, where are we?" "Zia's mother, this is what happened." The middle-aged man quickly supported his wife and explained in a low voice, "You all go out first, and lock the door for me." While the middle-aged man was explaining to his wife, Zhang Fengjai immediately instructed the young man who was responsible for guiding the guests just now. "Listen to Mr. Zhang." Facing the young clerk's inquiring eyes, Ye Xianyun, who had already developed feelings for Zhang Fengjai, immediately nodded and agreed. After all the staff in the store closed the door, Zhang Fengjai walked to the girl and said in a gentle tone, "Little sister, big brother can guess why you want to do this, and can understand your approach. At the same time, I can also guarantee that your parents will not only reconcile and be truthful, but also will not criticize you afterwards." "Really?" the simple-minded little girl immediately asked in surprise. "If you don't believe it, I can talk to your parents now." While nodding to make his promise, Zhang Fengjai also put forward his own requirements. "But you must tell me truthfully who taught you the acupointment massage technique afterwards." "No problem." The little girl immediately raised her chest and nodded in agreement. He turned and walked to the little girl's parents, and before the middle-aged man could react, his fingers as fast as the wind directly hit the other party's shenk and zigong acupoints. "What did you do to your husband?" Seeing her husband standing there with his eyes closed, the middle-aged woman immediately asked worriedly and angrily. "Auntie, don't worry, I just let your husband sleep unconsciously for a while." After waving his hand to indicate that the middle-aged woman didn't need to worry, Zhang Fengjai looked directly into her eyes and reminded her, "Since you are married, you should abide by the rules of wifehood and take care of your husband and children. You shouldn't be fickle and betray your family, which will eventually cause your daughter's hatred." The Best Physiognomist. Author, Yanyun Yuqi. Chapter 245. In Baiko Pavilion. Facing Zhang Fengjai's accusations and warnings, the middle-aged woman's eyes flashed with panic, and she immediately pretended to be angry and retorted, You don't want to slander anyone. I am a good woman who abides by my duties and has never done anything unbecoming of a woman." Yet, after asking a question with a slightly raised corner of his mouth, Zhang Fengjai sneered and gave her orders. "Auntie, although you have a broad mind, you are still lonely in the ups and downs of the mountains, and there is not enough yin and yang. It seems that you have done more in that area in the past 2 or 3 months. But where is your husband?" Reaching out and pointing at the middle-aged man who was immobilized, Zhang Fengjai continued to give instructions with a cold light flashing in his eyes. "The essence is tightly locked, the dragon yang returns to its position, the yang spirit rises to the sky, and the energy is abundant. For at least 2 to 3 months, the yin and yang have not converged, and the yu and yang has not leaked, which means that there has been no such thing." Facing Zhang Fengjai's exact instructions, the middle-aged woman's face turned pale as a sheet, and the panic in her eyes was immediately replaced by horror. Mr. Hu had not yet completely calmed down from the shock of Xiangui's 13 needles, immediately felt as shocked as a turbulent wave in his heart. Ye Xianyuan, who had a different kind of feeling in his heart, looked at Zhang Fengjai with a trace of tenderness and confusion. As for the little girl who seemed to understand, her eyes showed admiration as if she had seen her favorite star. I was wrong. I shouldn't have done anything to feel sorry for Xiaohuai's father because of my temporary loneliness and emptiness. I promise that I will change my past and stay at home honestly. The middle-aged woman with a look of horror in her eyes knelt directly in front of Zhang Fengjai, kowtowed hard and blamed herself, and also begged bitterly. Please don't tell Xiaohuai her father. I really don't want to lose my husband, nor do I want to destroy our family, nor do I want to lose my daughter. After all, after being married for more than 10 years, she is too familiar with her husband's temperament and temper. If he found out that she was cheating on her because of her physical needs, at least she would be kicked out of the house, or at worst, she might be beaten to death. Auntie, get up. Through the cracks in the husband and wife palace and the completely dim men and women palace, Zhang Fengjai knew that not only did the middle-aged women regret betraying their husbands, but they also had the determination to repent and turn a new leaf. At the same time, the middle-aged man's deep love for her just now, as well as the husband and wife palace, which also has no cracks at all, shows that they have hope of reuniting. This was also the confidence he had in daring to make a promise to the little girl just now, so he reached out to help the middle-aged woman who was kneeling in front of her, and Zhang Fengjai said solemnly. As the saying goes, once we meet each other in a short life, there will be so much incense and flames in the previous life. We have been cultivators in 10 lives to cross the same boat, and we have been cultivators in hundreds of lives to sleep together. Auntie, I hope you will always keep etiquette, justice and integrity in mind in the future, and be a good woman, wife and mother who abide by the 3 obediences and 4 virtues. I see. After reaching out to wipe away the tears in front of her eyes, the middle-aged woman nodded vigorously. After quickly untying the middle-aged man's acupuncture points with his fingers, Zhang Fengjai warned him with the same solemn expression before the other man opened his mouth to question. My wife in this life is the person you buried in your previous life, a favor you have yet to repay. The daughter in this life is your lover in the previous life, here to continue our unfinished love. Uncle, I hope you will see the fate of repaying your benefactor and reuniting with your lover, be less ungrateful, drink less soul-destroying wine, and cherish the person in front of you more. Zhang Fengjai's words seemed complicated, but in fact they were quite simple. The middle-aged man gradually understood the reason why his wife was gradually indifferent to him. This made him feel ashamed and he quickly held his wife's hands. Daughter-in-law, I'm sorry. I won't drink with those gangsters in the future. I will spend more time with you too. Seeing that the middle-aged man only apologized with shame, without any angry rebuke, it showed that he had never doubted his wife's loyalty. Zhang Fengjai secretly breathed a sigh of relief and turned around to walk to the little girl's side. Big brother, thank you. The little girl could tell that her father and mother had reconciled. After thanking her very happily, she took out a piece of white paper torn from her homework book and handed it to Zhang Fengjai. Big brother, the uncle who taught me acupuncture techniques is a teacher in the medical school. This is his portrait. Reaching out to take the paper and open it, Zhang Fengjai had a look of surprise in his eyes. Although the portrait was only drawn with a pencil, both the clarity of the portrait and the detailed depiction of the characters' expressions are so wonderful and pretty, which is enough to prove the little girl's amazing talent in painting. This is a young man about 30 years old, with handsome appearance, extraordinary temperament and a hint of arrogance between his eyebrows. At the same time, the eyes looking forward revealed a charming and profound look. Perhaps because of the young girl's high level of painting, or perhaps because of her very meticulous observation, Zhang Fengjai vaguely saw an evil glint in the other person's deep eyes. Little sister, do you believe Big Brother? After retracting his gaze from observing the portrait, Zhang Fengjai asked the little girl solemnly. Of course I believe it, The little girl nodded quickly and replied. Since you believe it, can you promise your elder brother that you must stay away from the uncle who taught you acupuncture massage in the future, and don't just stay with him? Okay. Thinking that the uncle was not only a teacher in the medical school, but also treated her very well, the little girl nodded reluctantly. In this regard, although Zhang Fengjie knew that his previous instructions were in vain, he was not dissatisfied at all. After his solemn expression was replaced by a smile, he shook the paper in his hand and asked, "Little sister, I like your painting very much. I wonder if you can give it to me." "Sure." The little girl was surprised that someone liked her work, and she nodded and agreed quickly. After putting away the paper in her hand, Zhang Fengjie turned and walked to Mr. Hu and asked, "Mr. Hu, I wonder if Baiko Pavilion can gather the 19 kinds of medicinal materials I need." In fact, before the incident in the pharmacy just now, Mr. Hu had already matched the 19 kinds of medicinal materials proposed by Zhang Fengjie with the medicinal materials stored in the warehouse. So, when facing Zhang Fengjie's questioning, he answered directly. "My friend, in addition to the 9-petal palm flower, the 6-path root falling grass, the 3-petal tranquilizing flower and the cherry-like living root fruit, the remaining 15 kinds of medicinal materials are in stock in the warehouse." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Best Physiognomist. Author, Yanyun Yuqi. Chapter 246. In Baiko Pavilion. The 9-petal palm flower, the 6-diameter fallen root grass, the 3-piece Ningxuan flower, and the cherry-like living root fruit are all mild and positive medicinal materials. It is used to reconcile Sulizi's insufficient vitality, and subtly improve her physique, ultimately achieving the effect of prolonging life, and is not a very urgently needed medicinal material. At the same time, among the 15 kinds of medicinal materials in Baiko Pavilion's inventory, there are 8 kinds of medicinal materials that can replenish Sulizi's energy and blood in the early stage, and 7 kinds of medicinal materials that can be used to relieve the mutated poison in Yunus' body. Therefore, facing the lack of 4 medicinal materials, Zhang Fengjie did not feel too disappointed, and directly took out the MasterCard card given to him by Zhuang Jian, then handed it to Ye Xianyun and said, "Mr. Ye, please send someone to get me some medicine right away." "Sister Xia, you all come in," Ye Xianyun quickly raised her head and shouted to the door. After the staff of Baiko Pavilion returned to their positions, she continued to give instructions to the female doctor and another male doctor. "Sister Xia, Brother Su, please accompany Mr. Hu to the warehouse to grab medicine for Mr. Zhang." Then, Ye Xianyun reached out and pushed the credit card back in front of Zhang Fengjie and said, "Zhang Fengjie, whether it was your timely resolution of the sudden medical accident just now, preserving Baiko Pavilion's reputation, or your actions against the Feng Shui layout 10 days later, you have given Baiko Pavilion and Ye Xianyun a life-saving grace that is difficult to repay. So, these medicinal materials are my personal thoughts. I hope you won't postpone them. Mr. Ye, if these medicinal materials are for my personal use, then I will definitely not be polite to you." Passing the credit card to Ye Xianyun again, Zhang Fengjie reminded with a smile. "But these medicinal materials are not only for the granddaughter of a certain big shot, but the credit card required to purchase the medicinal materials was also paid to me in advance. So, not only do you not need to be polite to me, but you must also never be polite to me." The two sentences "don't be polite to me" in different tones made Ye Xianyun guess Zhang Fengjie's intention, so she reached out and took the credit card and said with a smile, "If that's the case, then I won't be polite to you." After swiping his card to get the medicine, and then rejecting Mr. Hu's request for advice on Xiangui's 13 needles, and declining Ye Xianyun's invitation to have dinner, Zhang Fengjie left Baiko Pavilion directly with the packed medicinal materials. However, when passing by the middle-aged couple, he stopped and gave a kind reminder. Uncle, to treat damaged acupuncture points, you only need to use traditional Chinese medicine to replenish the blood. The cost of examination and medicinal materials is only 200 to 300 yuan at most. Zhang Fenjai's seemingly kind reminder made the middle-aged man immediately think of the unjust money spent at Tianren Hospital. He immediately took out 300 yuan and slapped it on the counter with anger, then took his wife and daughter and went straight to Tianren Hospital. Mr. Ye, what are you still doing? As he stepped across the threshold of Baikou Pavilion, Zhang Fenjai reminded Ye Xianyun, who still didn't react. Xiao Wang, Xiao Lin, Xiao Xia, change your clothes immediately and go to the entrance of Tianren Hospital. Zhang Fenjai's reminder made Ye Xianyun immediately think of the opportunity to damage the reputation of Tianren Hospital. She immediately greeted a few unfamiliar young people in the store and gave instructions in a low voice. After leaving Baikou Pavilion and getting into a taxi, Zhang Fenjai first called Sulitsi. When he learned that she had accompanied Shen Loxi to Weishan County to inspect the tourist resort villa project and it would take about 3 days to come back, she could only contact Zhuang Jian depressedly and helplessly, intending to help Yuna resolve the poison in her body. However, when he learned that Zhuang Jian and Yuna were in the ward of the affiliated hospital, he immediately felt something bad in his heart and immediately gave instructions to the taxi driver. Master, rush to the affiliated hospital as quickly as possible. Perhaps due to bad luck, or perhaps because the taxi driver was not skilled enough, the journey that originally only took about 15 minutes ended up taking nearly 30 minutes due to delays at several red lights and sudden braking. Just arrived at the affiliated hospital. After giving money and getting out of the car, Zhang Fenjai went straight to the outpatient building where the hematology department was located, and finally saw Zhuang Jian in front of the emergency room on the 6th floor. Zhang Fenjai, you're here. Seeing Zhang Fenjai rushing over, the anxious Zhuang Jian immediately stretched out her hand to greet him. Teacher Zhuang, what's going on? Zhang Fenjai couldn't help but frown and asked as he looked up at the red indicator light, which indicated that the patient was being rescued. Because last night he used the technique of sealing the acupoints with silver needles to force the mutated venom in Yuna's body into the 3 meridians, so there would be no danger in 3 days. Zhang Fenjai, I don't know what's going on. Zhuang Jian quickly shook her head and explained. Half an hour ago, after I just finished talking to you on the phone, Yuna, who was still eating fruit, suddenly vomited blood and fainted. How is it possible to eat fruit? Zhang Fenjai immediately questioned. The 3 fatal acupuncture points were sealed with silver needles, which not only ensured that the heart veins would not be harmed by the poison, but also directly sealed the consciousness of the sea of consciousness, keeping her in a comatose state. Unless. Thinking of this, Zhang Fenjai immediately asked with a gloomy face. Teacher Zhuang, did these guys in the hospital give Yuna medicine? It's medicine, but it's 3/3 poisonous. Unless new toxins are integrated into the mutated poison, causing the mutated poison to continue to mutate and directly break through the seals of the acupuncture points, it is possible to awaken Yuna's sealed consciousness. This morning, Director Chen from the hematology department gave Yuna a shot of vaccine to prevent her from contracting tetanus. Facing Zhang Fenjai's questioning with suppressed anger, Zhuang Jian replied carefully. Stupid. After hearing Zhuang Jian's reply, Zhang Fenjai, who could no longer suppress his anger, immediately shouted loudly. Zhuang Jian, when I asked you to take Yuna away yesterday, did I specifically tell you not to find someone to treat Yuna casually, let alone give her any medicine? Zhuang Jian, you are from the Supernatural Research Institute, you should know how powerful the Burmese cat that scratched Yuna is, and you should know that ordinary vaccines are useless. Why didn't you stop it in time? Facing Zhang Fenjai's stern questioning, Zhuang Jian lowered her head silently, with a look of grievance in her eyes. Who are you? What qualifications do you have to criticize and question Captain Zhuang? Just as Zhuang Jian lowered her head in grievance and remained silent, a middle-aged beauty with a noble temperament and a face that was 70% similar to Yunur, asked with an unhappy look. "Teacher Chuang, is this the medicine that Yunur's mother, the auntie, asked the doctor to use?" With a highly similar appearance, Zhang Fengjai didn't need to think too much, and knew that the beautiful middle-aged woman in front of him was Yunur's biological mother. At the same time, the other party's domineering momentum and condescending tone also allowed him to roughly guess the reason why Zhuang Jian couldn't stop the doctor from using the medicine. The Best Physiognomist. Author, Yan Yun Yuqi. Chapter 247. In front of the emergency room of the affiliated hospital. That's right. Faced with Zhang Fengjai's speculation, Zhuang Jian opened her mouth to defend the middle-aged woman, but the middle-aged woman suddenly stood in front of her, then looked straight at Zhang Fengjai with her chest and head held high, and asked arrogantly. "I am Yunur's biological mother, and I agreed to Director Chen's vaccination for Yunur. Do you have any objection? Since you are Yunur's biological mother, no matter what decision you make, it has nothing to do with me, and I, an outsider, certainly won't have any opinion." Faced with the middle-aged woman's arrogant questioning, Zhang Fengjai's eyes flashed with a hint of displeasure, and he suppressed his anger again and warned with a sneer. "But do you know that your self-righteous behavior will not only cause your daughter to die of poisoning, but also cause her to die in a painful torture worse than death? If Yunur can't bear the torture worse than death, she will definitely have endless resentment and hatred in her heart, so I have to congratulate you in advance. Yunur, affected by resentment and hatred, is likely to turn into a fierce ghost, and the first target of revenge is probably you. Because of your..." "Shut up. It's more of a vicious curse than a warning." So, the middle-aged woman, whose face was instantly gloomy, interrupted Zhang Fengjai's warning in a harsh voice and threatened him by pointing at his nose. "You self-righteous guy, who do you think you are? What qualifications do you have to determine the life and death of my daughter, and what confidence do you have to curse the fate of Yunur and me? Boy, do you believe it or not? Just based on the vicious curse you just cast on us mother and daughter, I can not only make you die without a burial place, but also make you live a life worse than death." The middle-aged woman's arrogant threat immediately aroused Zhang Fengjai's strong murderous intent. Just when he was about to give the other party a fierce counterattack, Zhuang Jian suddenly stood in front of her and looked at him silently with tears in her eyes. As a cultivator who can absorb the spiritual energy of heaven and earth into himself, his mind and perseverance are far superior to ordinary people. If they are not forced to a certain extent, cultivators who can cut their heads and bleed rarely shed tears. So facing Zhuang Jian's helpless tears, Zhang Fengjai, whose heart softened instantly, could only forcibly suppress the strong murderous intent that emerged in his mind, and turned away with a sigh. Alas! Although she wanted to chase Zhang Fengjai and explain to him in detail the origin of the middle-aged woman and the difficulties she could not stop, she was worried that the middle-aged woman in anger would plan to retaliate against him, so she could only watch him turn away with reluctance in her eyes. Just as Zhang Fengjai walked to the elevator with a gloomy face and was about to reach out to press the elevator signal button, the elevator in front of him suddenly opened slowly. Then, 5 strong men in black suits, with burly figures and fierce momentum, walked out of the elevator quickly, and 2 strong men in black pushed him aside directly. In this regard, Zhang Fengjai, who only wanted to leave the hospital as soon as possible, was not angry at the other party's overly unreasonable behavior. Then, a beautiful girl with long hair shawl, wearing a white-waisted long skirt, with skin like porcelain, lips like cherry blossoms, like a fairy in the clouds, pushed a white-haired old man sitting in a wheelchair out of the elevator. Turning back and smiling, 100 charms are born, and the 6 palaces are pale in comparison. When Zhang Fengjai saw the fairy coming out of the elevator, a poem by the Tang dynasty poet Bai Zhiyi immediately flashed in his mind. However, the other party's sudden quickening of pace made him lose the opportunity to continue observing the other party's peerless face. Although he felt a little pity, he didn't care much in his heart, and then stepped into the elevator that was about to close. But at this time, the red light in the emergency room suddenly turned green, indicating that the rescue process had ended. Since he was already discouraged and didn't want to meddle in other people's business, Yunus' life and death had nothing to do with him, so he went into the elevator without paying any attention. "I'm sorry, we've tried our best." However, just as the elevator door was about to close, an old voice apologized. Alas! Seeing that the final outcome was just as he had guessed, Yunus eventually died under the poison of the second mutation. Zhang Fengjai couldn't help but shook his head and sighed. Of course, sighing, he still had no intention of helping. When the elevator slowly reached the first floor and the elevator slowly opened, the phone in his pocket suddenly rang. When Zhang Fengjai saw that the number on the caller ID was Zhuang Jian, a sneer of contempt flashed in his eyes, and he hung up the phone and walked out of the elevator, then left the outpatient building through the automatic sensor door and ran straight to the road 50 meters away. However, just as he was about to reach the gate of the hospital, 9 strong men in black suits suddenly walked out of 2 black business cars outside the gate. The similar fierceness and sharpness, as well as the exact same clothing, made Zhang Fengjai immediately realize that the 9 black-clad sturdy men in front of him were not only in the same group as the 5 black-clad sturdy men he met in front of the elevator, but also that their target was likely to be him. So, while suddenly speeding up and rushing towards the hospital gate, he secretly mobilized his strong body strength. "Stop!" Seeing Zhang Fengjai suddenly speeding up, a black-clad sturdy man who was on the phone suddenly shouted loudly with his eyes suddenly brightened. Then, seeing Zhang Fengjai who ignored his scolding and continued to rush over, the black-clothed sturdy man immediately ordered his companions. "Catch him!" The 8 black-clothed sturdy men quickly dispersed, and kept a distance of 2 shoulder widths between each other, which made Zhang Fengjai immediately know that the other party was still a well-trained elite. Therefore, he immediately increased his physical strength, which was originally only 30% of the steel and iron bones, to 50%, and took the lead in attacking. Bang! After sidestepping the opponent's grappling hand, his right fist hit the opponent's chest as fast as a gust of wind. Although he knocked the opponent down directly with one punch, the right fist that was forcibly rebounded made him know that the opponent was not only a well-trained elite, but also a master of internal strength who had reached the state of great success. Just a casual punch directly knocked down his companion who had reached the state of great success, which made the black-clothed sturdy man who quickly hung up the phone change his face slightly and ordered immediately. "The idea is too strong, let's attack together." The 7 black-clad strong men dispersed, 3 of them immediately formed a triangle, and the other 4 immediately formed a square to surround Zhang Fengjai in the middle. The Best Physiognomist. Author, Yanyun Yuqi. Chapter 248. In front of the main gate of the affiliated hospital. Level 3, 4-corner formation. Seeing the joint attack formation quickly set up by the 7 black-clad strongmen, Zhang Fengjai whispered the origin of the formation, and his 50% ironclad physical strength immediately increased to 70%. Then, a straight punch from the basic boxing method was directly hit at the tallest black-clad strongman. And the tallest black-clad strongman, without any fear, also threw a straight punch and directly met his fist. At the same time, the attacks of the other 6 black-clad strongmen covered his chest, back and feet respectively. Bang! As the fists collided heavily, the tallest black-clad strongman retreated 5 or 6 steps in succession, shaking the palm that had just collided with force, and a look of extreme pain appeared on his face. After smashing the opponent's fist with one punch, 70% of his physical strength and the speed of his leg's sudden force allowed him to quickly get rid of the joint attack of the 6 black-clad strongmen. Then, he suddenly rushed forward and accelerated, and he immediately appeared next to a black-clad sturdy man with a scar on his face, and hit him directly on the back with a fierce elbow strike. While spitting out 2 mouthfuls of blood in succession, the other party fell directly to the ground, and then curled up in pain. At the same time, he quickly kicked his right foot and kicked the handsome black-clad sturdy man on the chin, causing him to fall heavily to the ground from a height of more than 2 meters, and then his head tilted and he fainted directly. Then, relying on the steel-like body defense, his right shoulder and back endured the attacks of the two black-clad sturdy men, and his hands hit the other party's throat like a venomous snake, causing the two black-clad sturdy men to fall to the ground due to the pain caused by short-term suffocation. Retreat, use real weapons immediately. 3 seconds. From ordering the 7 companions who had reached the state of great internal strength to attack together, to the 4th and 5th companions falling to the ground, the opponent only took 3 seconds. This made the black-clad sturdy man who had just answered the phone look gloomy, and he immediately shouted to his 2 companions who showed fear in their eyes. At the same time, his right hand also touched his lower back. Through the fights with several major chambers of commerce in Ningji City during this period, Zhang Fengjai immediately guessed their next move. Although he could easily dodge and resist the damage of bullets with his own reaction and speed, as well as his strong body defense, bullets were blind and could easily hurt innocent onlookers around, thus causing the impact of cause and effect. Therefore, he immediately mobilized his spiritual power to cooperate with the Qingfeng step without any hesitation, and appeared in front of the 3 black sturdy men one after another as fast as the wind, and quickly snatched the real weapons in their hands, and chopped them off to the ground with a chopping palm. After slowly exhaling a breath of turbid air, Zhang Fengjai threw the 3 real weapons he had just taken into the security room at the gate, then picked up the medicinal materials he had just put on the ground, and took a big step to leave the hospital. Zhang Fengjai, wait a moment. But at this moment, Zhuang Jian's voice suddenly came from the side, trying to keep him. In response, Zhang Fengjai ignored him and continued to walk away, but was stopped by Zhuang Jian, who used her spiritual power to coordinate her martial arts. Zhang Fengjai, I know that Mrs. Rong's actions just now made you very angry, but can you save Yunus' life for my sake? Zhuang Jian reached out and grabbed his arm, pleading with expectant eyes. No, Zhang Fengjai shook his head and refused without even thinking about it. What if the Rong family is willing to agree to any request you make? Zhuang Jian, who could understand the reason why Zhang Fengjai rejected her, was not sad or disappointed at all, and quickly stated the conditions proposed by the Rong family. Not interested. After shaking his head and refusing without any consideration, Zhang Fengjai was about to walk around Zhuang Jian and leave, when a moving voice like a valley orchid suddenly came from behind him. What if it is Rong Mok who personally promised on behalf of the Rong family? He stopped and turned around, looking at the beautiful lady who looked back and smiled charmingly, and the 6 palaces were pale in comparison. Zhang Fengjai's eyes flashed with a complicated look. Whether it was the stunning beauty, the extraordinary temperament, or the perfect body proportion, the girl in front of him named Rong Mok was the most beautiful, the most temperamental, and the most attractive girl he had ever seen. Since ancient times, everyone has a love for beauty. As a normal man in all aspects, Zhang Fengjai is no exception. However, his love for beauty is just a very simple appreciation, without any evil thoughts, and he has no desire to possess it for the time being. So, after truly appreciating Rong Mok's peerless beauty, he also shook his head and refused. Not interested. It can be seen that Zhang Fengjai's shaking head and refusing was not to use the means of playing hard to get to deliberately attract his attention. This made Rong Mok doubt her own charm for the first time in her life, and she couldn't help but feel a little interested in this ordinary-looking, slightly weak boy in front of her. She stretched out her slender little finger, picked up a few strands of hair scattered on her forehead, and asked with a smile on her face. Why? There's no reason, I'm just not interested. The extraordinary temperament and elegant movements add to Rong Mok's charm. Zhang Fengjai, who originally wanted to taunt her to avenge the humiliation in front of the emergency room, finally shook his head softly and said a few words. He turned around and walked out of the hospital gate, bypassing Zhuang Jian, and then waved his hand to the passing taxi. What if it is a condition for me to be your girlfriend? Zhang Fenjai's two consecutive refusal made Rong Mok's eyes flash with displeasure, and he directly took out the last killer full of traps. After all, a girlfriend is not a legal wife. Not only can she keep a certain distance to protect her own safety, but she can also break up at any time to sever the relationship. I'm sorry, I already have a beloved girlfriend. Zhang Fenjai, who was not aware of the traps in Rong Mok's conditions, shook his body slightly, and after a flash of tenderness in his eyes, he walked directly to a taxi parked on the side of the road. Not only did he reject the temptation of his killer, but he also took the initiative to admit that he had a beloved girlfriend in front of him. Zhang Fenjai's reply just now made Rong Mok couldn't help but reach out and touch her smooth and pink face, with an expression of disbelief in her eyes. Master, go to Golden Orchid Court. Zhang Fenjai opened the car door and sat in the passenger seat, and ordered the taxi driver who was staring at Rong Mok. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Best Physiognomist. Author, Yan Yun Yuqi. Chapter 249. In front of the gate of the affiliated hospital. All right. After retracting the reluctant gaze that was staring at Rong Mok, the taxi driver, who was only in his early 30s, stepped on the accelerator and prepared to leave. But at this moment, Zhuang Jian rushed to the car as fast as the wind. While stopping the taxi from leaving, she pointed at the old man in a wheelchair who was rushing over 50 meters away and warned. Zhang Fenjai, the white-haired old man, is named Rong Xiangtian. He is a hard-blooded soldier who has participated in countless wars to defend the country. He is a hero who has shed blood and been injured for the honor of the country. Without the bloodshed and sacrifice of passionate soldiers like Rong Lao and others, we would not have the happy and healthy life we have today, nor would there be an environment in which you and I can practice with peace of mind. After walking around the front of the car and walking to the window, Zhuang Jian looked directly into Zhang Fenjai's eyes and asked solemnly. So, no matter whether you are willing to save Yunar or not in the end, as a citizen of China and a monk in the Taoist sect, you should get out of the car and meet Mr. Rong. After hearing Zhuang Jian's reminder and request, Zhang Fenjai turned to look at the kind old man who had met once in front of the elevator. Looking at the other person's silver hair like frost and snow, looking at the remaining bullet wounds behind the other person's ears, and seeing how even though the disabled person is sitting in a wheelchair, he has to straighten his back and not insult the spirit of a soldier. Well. The image of his second grandpa's majestic appearance suddenly flashed through his mind, and he finally couldn't help but get up and get out of the car with a sigh, and took the initiative to greet him. Hello, little friend. Rong Mok, who stepped forward to greet him, had already briefly introduced his identity to Rong Xiangtian, so when he saw Zhang Fenjai coming over on his own initiative, he immediately greeted him with a kind smile on his face. Hello, old man. After his eyes swept over his legs covered with blankets, Zhang Fenjai took a deep breath and tried his best to smile in return. My friend, I have learned the details of the incident from Captain Zhuang and Yunar's mother. I, Rong Xiangtian, hereby solemnly apologize to you for Yunar's mother's recklessness and fault. Rong Xiangtian, who could see the forced smile on Zhang Fenjai's face, immediately bowed his head solemnly and apologized. This also made Zhang Fenjai, who had respected the iron-blooded soldiers since he was a child, immediately dodge and at the same time had to take a step back and signal with his hand. Old man, I'm fine now. You don't always have to do this. Little friend, due to some special reasons, my only son died unexpectedly 15 years ago. As a result, Yunar is not only the only bloodline of my Rong family, but also my only belief that I can survive now, so no matter how high the price is, old man, I want to save her life. Rong Xiangtian, who vaguely saw through Zhang Fenjai's action of avoiding his apology, vaguely saw through his kind nature, and explained and promised in an unusually heavy tone. As long as you can save my granddaughter, little friend, no matter what request you make, even if it means distributing all the property of my wrong family, old man, I will do my best to fulfill it. When she heard the promise Rong Xiangtian made to Zhang Fenjai, the expression of the middle-aged woman standing behind him changed slightly. Because she didn't expect that her old man would make such a serious promise regardless of any consequences, which made a look of worry flash in her eyes. Whether it was Rong Xiangtian's identity as an iron-blooded soldier or his promise just now at all costs, Zhang Fenjai admired him but also found himself in a difficult decision-making dilemma. First, the middle-aged woman's insults and threats made him feel completely discouraged, and at the same time, he really didn't want to meddle in his own business anymore. Secondly, the poisonous power of the cat demon that has undergone 2 consecutive mutations will definitely increase exponentially, and may even advance to the point where it is incurable. This makes him not have much confidence that he can bring Yun'er back to life. Thirdly, according to Zhuang Jian's introduction to Rong Xiangtian just now, he is worried that Rong Xiangtian's military career may be inextricably linked to the second grandfather. He is afraid that if he categorically rejects the other party's sincere request, it will cause Grandpa II to be sad and dissatisfied in the future. After all, when the second grandfather encountered a near-death ambush, it was the comrades around him who used their blood and lives to help him successfully break out. The second grandfather has always kept in mind the life-saving kindness of his comrades and has never forgotten it. When he left Shushanjiang's house, he specifically warned him. If in the world of mortals, he meets his comrades who participated in the counterattack and their descendants, he must do his best to help. This is one of the reasons why he has always tried his best to help Wang Denmei. Therefore, after careful consideration, Zhang Fenjai finally decided to inquire about Rong Xiangtian's experience in joining the army. If he and his second grandfather had a close comrade-in-arms relationship, then he would definitely do his best to save Yun'er. But if the other party has no relationship with the second grandfather, then he will continue to reject the other party's requests and promises, and then turn around and leave without hesitation. Old man, I wonder if you have participated in the counterattack 40 years ago. When Rong Xiangtian's body trembled slightly when he heard Zhang Fenjai mentioning the 40-year counterattack, his eyes immediately revealed a hint of memory. 40 years ago, I not only participated in the counterattack, but I was also at the forefront as a division commander. During this period, I annihilated as many as 3 enemy soldiers. Old man, I agree to your request and do my best to save Yun'er. Based on second grandpa's previous account of the counterattack, and combined with Rong Xiangtian's memories just now, Zhang Fenjai knew that although the other party and second grandpa did not have a comradeship in fighting together, they did share the righteousness of a division. Therefore, he directly interrupted Rong Xiangtian's memories, and then nodded vigorously in agreement. Why? Zhang Fenjai's sudden attitude of agreeing made Rong Xiangtian feel confused and asked. Because my second grandfather was also an iron-blooded soldier who participated in the counterattack and was physically disabled. After giving the reason for agreeing to save Yun'er, Zhang Fenjai raised his head and glanced at the middle-aged woman standing behind Rong Xiangtian. After a cold light flashed in his eyes, he quickened his pace towards the outpatient building. Seeing Zhang Fenjai walking towards the outpatient clinic building, Rong Xiangtian quickly gave Rong Mok a wink. Afterwards, Rong Mok immediately quickened her pace to catch up and pressed the elevator signal button in advance. The monk family who participated in the counterattack and suffered heavy losses from the soldier named Zhang, who is this kid's second grandfather. Looking at Zhang Fenjai's thin back, Rong Xiangtian frowned and fell into memories. The Best Physiognomist. Author, Yan Yun Yuqi. Chapter 250. In the affiliated hospital. After stepping into the elevator, Rong Mok looked up and stared into Zhang Fenjai's eyes and asked while Rong Xiangtian and others had not arrived yet. Zhang Fenjai, Do you really have no interest in the conditions I just proposed? Ever since she showed her stunning beauty at the age of 14, the elite children of the wealthy families in the imperial capital, the second generation of rich and officials, and the local tyrants who suddenly became rich, have begun to pursue her fanatically in advance. As she grew older, her appearance became more outstanding, and her character of liking to read and paint quietly gave her an elegant temperament that was out of this world, which caused the open and secret struggles of those children of the aristocratic families and the local tyrants. Therefore, Zhang Fenjai's refusal to her offer to be a girlfriend just now made Rong Mok feel unbelievable, and she couldn't help but think of continuing to test whether the other party was sincere, or a means to attract her attention. I really have no interest. After looking at Rong Mok with a blank expression, Zhang Fenjai nodded without hesitation and replied. Am I not beautiful? Rong Mok asked unwillingly. There is no beauty in the world, and a beauty is pleasing to the eyes. The beauty of the country is stunning, Zhang Fenjai praised sincerely. Then why are you not interested in me? Zhang Fenjai quoted the poem of Su Gongzi in the Shinayu to praise his appearance, which made Rong Mok feel extremely surprised and asked more unwillingly. 3,000 weak waters, only take one scoop. I already have a wife, I dare not ask for it. Looking at the numbers on the elevator display board, he replied calmly. What if I take the initiative to pursue you? As the saying goes, once, twice, but not 3 times. Zhang Fenjai's repeated rejections completely aroused Rong Mok's pride and unwillingness to admit defeat, and she even decided to take the initiative to pursue the other party. Of course, as long as he succeeds in catching up, the result waiting for Zhang Fenjai will be ruthlessly abandoned. Since you are not interested, why waste time and energy? Looking at the slowly opening elevator door, Zhang Fenjai stepped out of the elevator and gave an answer that made Rong Mok's face instantly pale. For some reason, not only did Yunur, who was pushed out of the emergency room, still stay at the door of the emergency room, but even the doctors and nurses who participated in the rescue also stood in front of the bed with gloomy faces. Moreover, among the doctors who participated in Yunus' rescue, there was also an acquaintance of his, that is, the icy female Dr. Guyu who almost delayed Pan Switting's rescue. Signing the doctors and nurses standing in front of the bed to step back a few steps, Zhang Fenjai reached out and lifted the white sheet covering Yunur, and his face instantly became solemn. At this time, Yunus' beautiful face, which was originally as smooth as cream, protruded one after another, blood bubbles the size of soybeans, not only making her look very scary, but also from several squeezed blood bubbles, a pungent smell was emitted. He took out a silver needle from his sleeve, dipped it in a little of the yellow liquid that flowed out of the squeezed blood bubble, and then mobilized his spiritual power to open his eyes and observe carefully. At this time, Rong Xiangtian and others rushed over in another elevator. A breath that could quickly devour life made Zhang Fenjai vaguely guess the origin of the poison contained in the yellow liquid. Then, he took out a spell to break evil from his sleeve, used his spiritual power to drive the spell to self-ignite, and directly inserted the silver needle stained with yellow liquid into the spell flame. Then, the yellow liquid burned like gunpowder, and exuded an attractive aroma. What a good smell! When she smelled the aroma of hangren in the air, a female nurse in charge of the rescue couldn't help but sighed softly and took a few deep breaths. But several doctors who participated in the rescue, Zhuang Jian, Rong Xiangtian, the middle-aged woman, Rong Mok, and 5 strong men in black suddenly covered their noses with their hands. Even 5 strong men in black directly surrounded Rong Xiangtian, and then retreated to prepare for evacuation. Seeing Zhuang Jian and others covering their noses, and Rong Xiangtian preparing to retreat, Zhang Fenjai waved his hand to extinguish the talisman flame, and smiled and reminded. Teacher Zhuang, old man, don't be nervous, this is the flame burning by the exorcism talisman, which has completely removed the poisonous gas in the yellow liquid, and the fragrance emitted is not dangerous. Then, he put away the silver needle in his hand, used the open sky eye, carefully observed the situation in Yunus' body, and the smile on his face was replaced by solemnity again. Because the original method of using silver needles to seal the acupoints, the poison that was forcibly sealed in the 3 closed meridians not only successfully broke through and penetrated into the heart meridian, but also protruded blood bubbles on the organs of the 5 internal organs. But for some reason, there was a very special energy in her heart position, not only maintaining her vitality into a state of suspended death, but also her soul did not leave the sea of consciousness. After the observation of the sky eye was over, Zhang Fengjai immediately stretched out his fingers and placed them on the other person's wrist, using the technique of feeling the pulse to re-examine, focusing on feeling the special energy at the heart position. 3 minutes later, after retracting his fingers from Yunus' wrist, Zhang Fengjai sat directly at the end of the bed, closed his eyes and began to meditate. Through the technique of feeling the pulse, he had sensed the special energy at Yunus' heart position, which came from a powerful demon. Only a great demon in the realm of spiritual enlightenment can perfectly hide the demonic energy in his energy, just like the life-saving trump card given to him by the special beings in Shusan. But the energy left by the great demon was too scarce, and it could only barely maintain Yunus' life, but could not dispel the poison in her body. However, it was precisely because of the protection of that trace of essence that he had the method to bring Yunus back to life. Just as Zhang Fengjai was lost in deep thought, the middle-aged woman standing behind Rong Xiangtian showed a complicated look in her eyes. As Yunus' biological mother, whether from family affection or interests, she hoped that Zhang Fengjai could bring her daughter back to life. But Rong Xiangtian's reckless promise made her very worried that Zhang Fengjai would take a fancy to the wealth and power of the Rong family, and eventually make her lose her rich and glorious life. After all, judging from Zhang Fengjai's ordinary clothes, he should be a person who came from a poor family, but had his own opinions and pride. Just as the middle-aged woman was having mixed feelings, not knowing whether to pray or curse, Zhang Fengjai suddenly opened his eyes and asked Zhuang Jian. "Teacher Zhuang, where is the red Burmese cat you captured alive?" "In the ward." "Please bring it here immediately." Zhuang Jian immediately turned around and ran straight to the stairs on the east side of the emergency room, then mobilized her spiritual power to perform martial arts and rushed to the ward at an accelerated speed.